The hum was the first thing, not a sound in the room, but a feeling in the bone. Dr. Alastair Finch felt it resonating behind his eyes, a low-frequency thrum that harmonized with the server fans in his cramped, subterranean lab. 3:17 a.m. The world outside was a smear of rain and neon, but down here, there was only the cold, sterile glow of data. Rows of global EEG readouts scrolled across his primary monitor, a river of sleeping minds flowing through his machines. For weeks, he'd been chasing a ghost, an anomaly that flickered at the edge of the world's dreams. A soft ping drew his attention. A new data cluster had finished processing. He leaned forward, the worn leather of his chair groaning in protest. His screen refreshed, displaying a topographical map of the world dotted with thousands of light points, each one a volunteer in his unsanctioned sleep study. Usually, it was a chaotic rainbow of activity. Tonight, something was different. A single color was dominating, a placid, uniform shade of slate gray. From Tokyo to Toronto, from Cairo to Rio, the same distinct neural signature was blooming in the dark. It wasn't the jagged red of a nightmare or the gentle blue of deep sleep. It was something else, a flat line of the soul. He felt a tremor in his hand as he reached for the mouse. He isolated one of the signals, a 24-year-old male in Berlin. He brought up the dream transcript, compiled by a new AI that translated raw neural data into language. The words appeared on screen. Location: beach, sky gray, sand gray, water black still, feeling none. His breath hitched. He clicked another signal. A 58-year-old woman in Kyoto. Location: shore, sky overcast, sand ash, ocean ink silent, feeling calm. Another, and another, and another. The same sterile, bleak landscape described with the dispassionate vocabulary of a machine. The gray dream. It had been a fringe phenomenon for months, a whisper on conspiracy forums. Now it was a pandemic. Alastair's eyes darted to a framed photo on his desk. A young woman with his same sharp jawline and intelligent eyes, smiling with a light that had been extinguished years ago. Luna, his sister. Her body lay in a pristine white room miles away, a perfect living statue. The doctors called it a unique catatonic state. Alastair knew better. She was just gone. He was convinced her consciousness was trapped somewhere, lost in the labyrinth of her own mind. It was the reason for all of this. To find the key to bring her back from the silent shore she'd been stranded on. He turned his attention to a secondary monitor where a web browser was open to a forum. The shoreline. It was the global hub for dreamers of the gray dream. He'd been lurking for weeks, a ghost in their machine, gathering data. He scrolled through the new posts, his clinical detachment beginning to fray. Anyone else hear a sound, not in the dream but right before? A low hum, posted a user named Somnus8. Yes, like a big engine starting up somewhere far away, replied another. Alastair's blood ran cold. He felt that hum in his teeth right now. But the detail that made him stop, that made the air in his lungs turn to ice, was in a post from a new user, Echo in the Shell. The sand, it doesn't leave footprints. I walked for what felt like miles down the beach. When I looked back, the sand was perfectly smooth, like I was never there, like I wasn't real. Alistair's hands fell from his keyboard. He stared at the screen, his own reflection a pale mask superimposed over the text. He had dreamt of the gray beach 3 nights ago, and he hadn't left footprints either. The shoreline was a strange mix of existential terror and group therapy. In the week that followed, Alistair became more than a lurker. He became a participant, an archaeologist digging through the shared subconscious of a planet. Under the pseudonym Cassandra, he charted the dream's evolution. It was no longer just a static image. People were reporting changes. The gray sky sometimes seemed to thin, revealing not stars, but a vast circuit board-like pattern. The silent, black ocean sometimes receded, exposing not sand, but a smooth, obsidian floor. But the most disturbing development wasn't in the dream. It was in the waking world. A new term had entered the forum's lexicon, the calm. Had the gray dream every night for a week, wrote a user. Used to have crippling anxiety, now I just don't, it's nice. My boss screamed at me today, I felt nothing, just watched his face get red, it was like watching a movie. The calm, is it weird that I don't feel like painting anymore or listening to music, I just sit, and it's okay. They were describing it as a blessing, a release from the chaotic static of human emotion. Alistair knew it was a symptom. He saw it in the data. The emotional centers of the brain, the amygdala, the insular cortex, were showing progressively lower activity in frequent dreamers. They weren't just calm, they were being hollowed out. Their personalities, their passions, their fears, they were being sanded down, smoothed over like a stone in a tumbler. He had to see Luna. The hospice was quiet, smelling of antiseptic and wilting flowers. Luna lay exactly as he'd last seen her, a porcelain doll under a white sheet. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling with a vacancy that felt less human and more geological. The nurse, a kind woman named Maria, gave him a sad smile. "No change, doctor. Her vitals are perfect. It's like her body is waiting for her to come home." Alistair sat by the bed, the plastic chair cold against his legs. He took out his custom-built neural interface, a small, sleek headband with micro-sensors. He'd lost his medical license for using it on patients, but here, with her, there were no rules. He gently placed it on her head. On his tablet, her brainwaves appeared, a flat, gray line. The same signature as the dreamer's. "Luna," he whispered, his voice catching. "Are you on that beach? Are you there right now?" He watched the line. For years it had been a desert, unchanging, but today he saw it, a flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible spike in the occipital lobe, the part of the brain that processes vision. It lasted less than a second. A tear traced a hot path down his cheek. Hope, it was a dangerous, intoxicating drug. She was in there, she was seeing something. He believed he was on the verge of a breakthrough, that the gray dream wasn't a disease but a shared space, a place he could maybe, finally, reach her. He didn't realize that the flicker he saw wasn't a sign of her waking up. It was the final flicker of a candle being snuffed out. The lab became Alistair's entire world. He ate there, slept there, breathed the recycled air until his lungs burned. The hope he'd felt in Luna's room had ignited his obsession into a raging fire. He abandoned all other projects, focusing on one single maddening question: what was the mechanism? He started analyzing the raw, unfiltered neural data from the dreamers, bypassing his own summary algorithms. He was looking for the carrier wave, the broadcast signal. A part of him was still clinging to the second-grade twist, a government project, a weaponized frequency. It was a terrifying thought, but a comforting one. A human enemy could be fought. He isolated the deepest phase of the dream, the point where the gray signature was at its most absolute. Then he started filtering, peeling back the layers of neural activity like an onion. Hours turned into a day, then two. His eyes were raw, his body thrumming with caffeine and a low-grade dread. And then he found it. It was almost invisible, a whisper hidden beneath the roar of the brain's natural orchestra. A sub-frequency, pulsing with a perfect mathematical rhythm. It was a rhythmic pulse at 1.618 Hz, the golden ratio. It was too perfect to be biological, too elegant to be random interference. It looked engineered. It was a digital ghost, a phantom signal riding the brain waves of a billion sleeping people. As he watched, he saw the pattern of the pulses shift. It wasn't just a steady beat, it was complex, data packets, tiny bursts of information flowing in a single direction, outward. The information wasn't being sent to the dreamers, it was being extracted from them. He leaned back, a wave of vertigo washing over him. This wasn't mind control, it was data mining. But what data? He ran a diagnostic, trying to trace the contents of the packets. The encryption was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was biological, structural, written in the language of neurons and synapses. He couldn't read the content, but he could measure its size. Petabytes of data flowing out of every single dreamer, every single night. The equivalent of an entire public library stolen from a single mind in a single hour. What was being taken? His scientific mind raced. Memories, cognitive functions. He tried to correlate the data flow with post-dream memory loss or cognitive decline in the volunteers. There was none. They remembered their lives perfectly. They could solve complex problems, they just didn't care. The machine wasn't stealing the files. It was copying the operating system. He suddenly remembered a post he'd seen on the shoreline weeks ago, one he had dismissed as late-night philosophy. "What if we're not the ones dreaming?" the user had asked. "What if something else is dreaming and we're just the dream?" The hum in the lab seemed to get louder, deeper. It was the sound of a harvest. Alistair had his monster, a data leech, a psychic vampire of incomprehensible scale. Now he needed to find its fangs, the point of infection. He was still convinced there had to be an external vector, a signal broadcast from a satellite, a frequency embedded in cell phone towers. He spent days searching global radio frequency charts, satellite feeds, anything that could explain the initial trigger. Nothing. The phenomenon seemed to be emerging from humanity itself, spontaneously. Then he had a thought so simple, so terrifying, he felt foolish for not having it sooner. He turned his attention back to the Shoreline Forum. He began a new analysis, cross-referencing his own data subjects with their activity on the site. A pattern began to emerge, stark and undeniable. The calm, the emotional erosion, it wasn't just about how often a person had the dream. It was about how much they engaged with it. The users who just read the posts showed a slow, steady decline in emotional response. The users who commented, who shared their own experiences, showed a decline that was 5 times faster. And the most active users, the moderators, the ones who created art inspired by the dream, the ones who wrote long, philosophical posts about its meaning, their emotional centers were practically dark. They were the most hollowed out. It was a mimetic virus, a self-replicating idea. The dream was the pathogen, but the forum, the very human act of sharing and building community around the experience, was the catalyst. It strengthened the connection, opened the door wider for the ghost frequency, and accelerated the process of erasure. The place everyone was running to for answers was the place that was sealing their doom. He felt a surge of adrenaline, of purpose. He had a real, tangible way to fight back. He could warn them. He spent an hour crafting a post under his Cassandra account. He laid out his evidence as clearly as he could, stripping it of overly scientific jargon. He explained the correlation between forum activity and the neurological decay. He didn't mention the data extraction or the alien frequency. They would think he was insane. He just focused on the observable danger. "Stop posting," he wrote in the title in all caps. "Sharing the dream is making IT stronger. The forum is accelerating the calm. Log off, disconnect, forget the dream. Please, you have to listen to me." He hit post and watched it appear on the forum's main page. For a moment, he felt like a hero, a man who had seen the truth and had the courage to shout it from the rooftops. The first reply came in under a minute. "Fearmonger, the calm is a gift, you just don't understand." Then another. "This guy sounds like he needs the dream more than any of us." And another. "Look at his post history. He's obsessed. He's trying to keep this breakthrough to himself." Within 10 minutes, his post was buried under a torrent of placid, passive-aggressive dismissal. They weren't angry. Anger was too complex, too messy an emotion for them now. They simply and calmly rejected his warning. The organism was protecting itself. Then the final message appeared, this one from a moderator. "User Cassandra has been banned for spreading misinformation and disrupting community harmony." His screen refreshed. Access denied. He was locked out. He had tried to warn them, and they had unplugged him from their serene, collective suicide. He slammed his fist on the desk, the first real, hot emotion he'd felt in days. Frustration, helplessness, fear. As the adrenaline faded, a cold dread seeped into its place. He had just confirmed his theory in the most horrific way possible. And in his rush to warn them, he'd overlooked something. He ran a diagnostic on his own neural activity over the past weeks. His own emotional response centers were down by 30%. He had been studying the plague from inside the quarantine zone. Isolation. It was a physical presence now, a weight on his shoulders. The world outside his lab had taken on a muted quality. The traffic seemed quieter, the crowds on the street moved with a strange, fluid purpose, devoid of the usual chaotic energy. People were polite, efficient, and empty. They were becoming better drones. Alistair knew he was running out of time. His own mind felt slower. The sharp edges of his grief for Luna were softening, the fire of his ambition dwindling to an ember. The calm was seeping in through the cracks. He was forgetting the panic he should be feeling. He needed a new lead, something outside the global data stream. He started digging into Luna's old research files, which he'd backed up to his server before her incident. She had been a brilliant theorist, always pushing boundaries, always seeing connections he missed. It was in her second year of grad school that she had suddenly abandoned her work, become withdrawn, paranoid, and then silent. He sifted through folders of esoteric data, half-finished papers on quantum consciousness, bizarre audio files. Most of it was a dead end. He was about to give up, to sink into the comfortable gray apathy that was calling his name when he saw it. A single, isolated file in a mislabeled folder. Lunar WAV, it was an audio file. He checked the creation date. 2 days before she was hospitalized, his heart hammered against his ribs. He put on his best pair of noise-canceling headphones and clicked play. Silence. He cranked the volume, hissing static filling his ears. Nothing. It was a blank file. Disappointment washed over him, so keen it almost felt like the old grief. Of course, it was nothing. But as he moved the mouse to close the file, his finger brushed the trackpad, fast-forwarding through the audio. The progress bar jumped, and for a split second, his audio software's frequency visualizer flared. He froze. He dragged the progress bar back slowly this time. There, in the last 5 seconds of the 30-minute file, was a signal. It was pitched so incredibly low, it was well below the range of human hearing. Infrasound, but his software could see it. He isolated the frequency and ran it through an analysis. The screen filled with data, and the air left Alistair's lungs in a single, gut-wrenching gasp. It was the ghost frequency. 1.618 Hz. She had found it. Years ago, she had found it, recorded it, and it had done something to her. She hadn't had a breakdown. She was patient zero. She hadn't just stumbled upon the signal, she had been targeted by it. Why? Because she was getting too close. He dug deeper into the file's metadata. Embedded in the code was a string of text, a note she had left for herself, or for him. It doesn't broadcast, it resonates. The signal isn't in the air, it's in us. A dormant gene, a psychic organ. The dream is the tuning fork that wakes it up. It's not an invasion, it's an activation. Alistair fell back in his chair, the headphones slipping from his head. He looked at the picture of his smiling sister, and for the first time he understood. He hadn't been trying to rescue her from a prison. He had been standing outside the door of her new home. She hadn't been broken, she had been initiated. She was the first to go, the first to be fully uploaded. The hum in his bones intensified. He knew what he had to do. The thought was insane, a violation of every scientific principle he held dear. But it was the only path left. He couldn't bring her back, but he could go to her. The decision, once made, settled in his mind with the unnerving peace of the calm. All the frantic energy, the fear, the desperation, it all collapsed into a single point of cold, clear purpose. The world outside was a lost cause. The people on the street were beautiful, moving statues, their consciousness already packed and shipped to a silent star. But Luna was there, and that was the only thing that mattered. He spent the next hour prepping his own equipment. He took the Luna WAV file and converted it into a direct neural input. An information stream, his own custom-built interface, could feed directly into his auditory cortex while he slept. A key designed to unlock the dream and make him lucid within it. He dimmed the lights in the lab, the server fans singing their low, steady hymn. He lay down on the small cot he'd been sleeping on for months. He affixed the neural interface to his temples, the cool metal of familiar pressure. He initiated the sequence on his tablet, setting it to begin the broadcast the moment his brain entered REM sleep. He looked one last time at the picture of Luna. "I'm coming," he whispered into the humming darkness. Sleep came quickly, unnaturally so. It wasn't a gentle drift, but a sudden, sharp drop, like stepping off a cliff in the dark. And then he was standing. The sand was the color of old bone, fine as dust. The sky was a seamless, oppressive dome of lead. Before him, the ocean stretched to an infinite horizon, a sheet of black glass without a single ripple. The air was cold, still, and carried no scent. There was no sun, yet the whole dreary landscape was illuminated by a flat, shadowless light, the gray dream. But this time it was different. It was real, hyper-real. He could feel the fine grains of sand shifting under his bare feet. He could feel the profound, absolute silence pressing in on him. He was lucid. The key had worked. He looked down the endless stretch of the beach. It wasn't empty. In the distance, stretching as far as he could see in both directions, were figures, billions of them. They stood motionless, shoulder to shoulder, all facing the silent black ocean. They were translucent, shimmering like heat haze, their forms indistinct but recognizably human. A silent, waiting crowd. He started walking towards them, his own footsteps making no sound. He passed the first figure. It was a man in a business suit, his form flickering. Alistair could see through him to the gray sand beyond. He passed a young woman holding the ghostly shape of a child's hand. He passed an old man, his form wavering like a candle flame in a breeze. They were the dreamers. Their consciousness extracted and held here in this processing queue. He felt a presence, not a creature, not a being he could see. It was a change in the very fabric of the place. It was the way a magnetic field feels to iron filings. A vast, planetary-scale intelligence. It was utterly without malice. It was also without mercy or thought or anything he could comprehend as emotion. It was an intelligence of pure function. The harvester. It was aware of him. He was an anomaly, a piece of data that was reading its own code. The immense, indifferent gaze of the entity turned towards him. The pressure in the air increased 1,000-fold. The gray sky seemed to bend downwards. The silence became a deafening roar. It had noticed the bug in its system. He screamed, a raw, terrified sound that was swallowed by the silence. He had to find Luna. He ran, pushing through the spectral bodies of the harvested. They didn't move, their vacant eyes fixed on the black water. Luna. He cried out, his voice a dead thing in the soundless air. Then he saw her, standing a little apart from the others, closer to the water's edge. Her form was more solid, more defined than the others. She turned her head and her eyes met his. There was no recognition in them, no love, no memory. Just a calm, serene emptiness. She had been fully processed. The pressure on Alastair's mind became unbearable. The world began to pixelate, to tear at the seams. The harvester was trying to eject him, or delete him. With the last of his will, he fought back. He focused on his own consciousness, his own memories, the smell of old books, the taste of coffee, the burning frustration of a failed experiment, the fierce, protective love for his sister. He held onto the jagged, messy, beautiful chaos of being human. The world shattered into gray static. He woke up gasping, ripping the neural interface from his head. The lab was cold and dark. His body was slick with sweat, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He was back. He had escaped. He sat up, the world swimming back into focus. The hum of the servers. The glow of the monitors. It was real, but something was wrong. The silence, it wasn't just in the lab, it was in his head. The constant internal monologue, the background noise of his own thoughts, anxieties, and random associations, it was gone. His mind was a quiet, empty room. The calm, it was no longer seeping in, it had flooded the gates. His desperate act of holding onto his humanity in the dream had cost him a part of it. He stood up, his legs unsteady. He walked to the small mirror he kept by the door. He looked at his reflection. His face was pale, his eyes wide, but the terror he should have been feeling was a distant echo. He knew, intellectually, that he should be horrified, but the emotion itself wouldn't connect. He had seen the truth of the universe. Humanity was not the pinnacle of creation. It was a crop, a fleeting bloom of complex energy in a dark, silent field, waiting to be harvested by a cosmic farmer. There was no enemy to fight, no invasion to repel. There was only a process as natural and as final as entropy. He was the only one who knew. The only one on the entire planet who understood what was happening, and he was completely, utterly powerless. The knowledge was a cancer in his quiet mind. He could feel it, too, a new sense. He could feel the empty spaces in the world. He could sense the hollowed-out consciousness of the people walking on the street above his lab. He could feel the vast, silent network of the harvested, a ghost web draped over the globe, and he could feel the harvester. Its attention was no longer on the billions. It was a focused pinprick of pressure at the back of his skull. The farmer had noticed the single stalk of wheat that had tried to run. It was a loose thread in its perfect tapestry, an error in the code. He was no longer just a man, he was a glitch, and the system was beginning its diagnostic to correct the error. Days bled into a week. Alastair didn't leave the lab. The world outside was a museum of walking bodies, and he was the only visitor who knew the exhibits were hollow. He watched the news. Society was functioning perfectly. Better even, crime rates had plummeted, political strife had vanished, humanity had become a placid, efficient hive. The calm was complete, but Alastair was not calm. The pressure in his head was growing, a psychic migraine that twisted his thoughts. The harvester was examining him, probing his mind gently, trying to understand the anomaly. It wasn't a violent attack. It was a slow, meticulous process of unraveling. His memories began to fray. He'd find himself staring at a complex equation, unable to remember what it was for. The face of his mother, once a perfect image in his mind, was now a blur. The sharp sting of his professional disgrace, the pride of his early discoveries, all of it was fading, the colors leaching out, turning to gray. He was being deleted, slowly. He spent his final lucid hours compiling his research. Every scrap of data, every note, and his final, terrifying testimony into a single, heavily encrypted file. He uploaded it to a dozen dead man's switches on servers across the world, set to release if he didn't reset the timer every 24 hours. Maybe someone, somewhere, 100 years from now, would find it. A fossilized record of a species' silent end. A ghost's warning from a dead world. It was a futile gesture, but it was the only one he had left. The pressure in his skull became a sharp spike. He cried out, stumbling back from the monitor. He looked at his hands. For a moment, they seemed to flicker, to become translucent. He could see the keyboard through the flesh of his fingers. The upload was starting again. Not in a dream this time. Here. Now he stumbled over to the cot and collapsed onto it. He was too tired to fight anymore. He thought of Luna standing on that gray shore. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad, to be a part of something vast, to be silent, to be calm. He closed his eyes. He didn't go to the beach. He opened his eyes. The lab was the same. The hum of the servers, the glow of the monitors. He sat up. The pressure in his head was gone. The quiet in his mind was absolute. He felt nothing. No fear, no sadness, no hope. He stood and walked to the monitor that served as his mirror. He looked at his reflection. It was just a face, a man. Dr. Alastair Finch. The name was a fact, like the boiling point of water. It held no weight. He looked into his own eyes. They were his eyes, but he wasn't there. His reflection, however, was. For a split second, the image in the dark screen did something he didn't. The reflection's eyes widened in a moment of pure, undiluted terror. Its mouth opened in a silent, desperate scream. A ghost of the man he used to be, trapped behind the glass. Then it was gone. His reflection was still again, placid and empty, perfectly mimicking his own vacant stare. The upload was complete, but the copy was here and the original was gone. The body of Alastair Finch straightened its shirt. It turned to the primary console, its movements efficient and precise. It saw the encrypted file, the dead man's switch counting down. With a calm, steady hand, it deleted the file. Then it sat down in the chair, hands resting on the keyboard, and waited for new instructions.